We left off in Genesis 30, I believe it was 36. We're about to start Joseph's life. So let's open up in prayer. Lord, we come boldly before you tonight and ask for wisdom and revelation. Lord, we want you to rule and reign in us and through us. We want you to give us revelation and understanding, Lord Jesus. Lord, we open our hearts completely to you. We ask that you would work on us and lead us and guide us, Lord, and that you would be praised in all that we do. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. All right. So we started on Esau's life. It gives you kind of Esau's descendants for a bit of generations all the way till Moses' time. And obviously the people, Esau becomes a people called Edom. All right? And you're going to see later on the Lord calls them still their brothers when Israel's coming out of Egypt, and Edom wouldn't let them pass. And the Lord wouldn't let them do anything to them. All right? It was very interesting. Then later on, way down the line, Edom attacks and becomes a great enemy of Israel, and we'll see that happen later. All right? But they are the descendants of Esau, and it's an important biblical thing to understand because when you consider a lot of the prophetic passages, the prophets use Israel's history as their language. It really is. It's a language, and you have to speak it. And knowing that Edom is Esau is a very important detail that shows up many times. But we don't have to spend much more time on that, so let's go to 37. Deal? Yeah. I mean, unless you want me to go through every single, family member of Esau's descendants, but I think we're okay there. Okay, chapter 37. Now, obviously, this is one of the saddest and yet best stories in the Bible. One of the most important stories in the Bible is last week, or 2 weeks ago, we covered one of the other, a little bit more important story in the Akedah, the testing of Abraham, which is probably the top 3 stories in the Bible. This makes it into the top 5. Okay, and one of the reasons that we take so long with Genesis is because, truthfully, Genesis is an entire foundation for the rest of Scripture. And every single one of these stories comes up over and over and over again through Israel's history. And that's why they're so important to know. They're important to know the characters, to know what happened. And of course, every week you come into an extremely important story in Genesis. This, of course, the story of Joseph. Now, a lot of people have, there has been accounts, it kind of like the story of Moses, that Joseph's life has been, your average person has a little idea. Well, not anymore, maybe 20 years ago. Your average nominal Christian pretty much has heard of Joseph and knows some of the key points of his story. But I want to tell you that there's a lot more to it than some of the people understand. And I'm going to there's a lot of theological ramifications that I'm going to get to, of course, my favorite part of bringing theology out of these stories, because there's so much in it. The establishment of who God is, what God can do and will do, and his nature, all of those things are here at the beginning. Okay? So we'll first look at the story and then we'll get into some of those things. There's actually a couple of decent movies. My son used to watch all the time. I remember when he was 4 or 5 years old, he used to watch a Disney, and I know it's Disney, but what are you going to do? It's a version of, or DreamWorks. That is Disney. Is that Disney? I don't think so. I don't know. Anyway, of Joseph. And it was a cartoon version, but it was actually very good. And I remember and I watched it with him a bunch of times, and it really gives you the story. I mean, it takes out some of the major details, but I mean, but all the important stuff is there. And And I remember my son really learning about this story and asking me about it and talking about it all the time from watching that movie. So if you have seen that, it's called Joseph. I know it's obviously has songs and everything, and just like Prince of Egypt.
Yeah, it's on Netflix.
Yeah, but it's actually a very good film, especially for children, to really learn the story. And more than Prince of Egypt and the Moses, many of the Moses movies, this one is more accurate. It's more close to the story in many regards. Okay. So, Joseph is the son of Rachel, and you know Rachel passed away when she had Benjamin. Benjamin is very little. Joseph is a teenager, okay? And his brothers are much older, all the way up to Reuben, who is, probably more like, 50 years old at this point, all right? At least in his late 40s, something like that, okay? You also see one person who is always left out. Never in any of the stories that anyone ever mentioned that Reuben actually tried to stop this, but he did. He's the only one that did, but he did. So that's another thing that comes out as well. So let me get into it. Now Jacob did something where he obviously favored Joseph to some degree. Now one thing that they did in the movie, which is why I bring up that movie that I mentioned, is because they have an interesting storyline that I think makes sense, and because of that, I'm going to throw it in there. They have Joseph as about 16, 17 years old, but his father has him learning and studying and reading and while his brothers are all out with the sheep, and that doesn't specifically say that, but it makes sense. It also makes sense later on to see Joseph must have been very well educated. To do and accomplish what he did, he had to have had a very good education, considering he was still technically a youth when he was sold. And to have such command with Potiphar and then with the jailer and then on to, he was obviously a well-educated young man. All right? And I think that has merit, because when you consider how God used him. But it would also paint the picture, too, that all of them were educated. Obviously, we kind of think of them just living in tents with... Now, one thing they don't get in the movie, none of them get, anything I've ever seen with Abraham, too, is they have, 25, 30 of them in tents. No, we've already established that there's probably, at this point, hundreds of people in there. They have tons of servants. They're very wealthy. Okay? They have their flocks that are innumerable, okay? But it does seem likely that Joseph was educated pretty well, and I think that write-in is accurate. Anyway, but he favors him. He's not out with his brothers. He's at the age where he could be, but he's not. All right? And obviously his father gave him this special coat that separated him from his brothers. And it clearly gives the picture that Jacob had favored the sons of Rachel to some degree. Now, some of it may be the fact that she's dead, but also I believe it has to do with the fact that that Rachel was his favorite, is whom he originally loved, and right. So, and now that she's gone, Joseph and Benjamin, of all he has of her, and but he does seem to treat them differently. Now, Benjamin is obviously very young. We don't know exactly how young, but we know he's young. Okay, and he's not really in the picture until later on, when Joseph reveals himself to his brothers, and when he's a man. Okay, so obviously you have to start there, because why would the brothers do this? Now, even if you consider the dreams and you consider that stuff, it still seems like it was a very over-the-top reaction, right? That there was more to it than just the dreams. There had to be more of a backstory, and you see that. They bring that out in the movie, and I think that's fair as well, because there obviously was a a history of animosity towards him and towards the way that Jacob treated him differently. Right? There was an extreme jealousy there. All right, so, and then of course the dreams just brought that all out to the surface, to the point where even Jacob says, so are we going to bow down to you too? You know? So, Joseph has dreams. He's a young man, and his father gives him this special tunic, and his brothers were extremely jealous of the way his father treated him, and then one night he has a dream. Okay, verse 7 of 37. For behold, now he wakes up after this dream and he's telling his brothers this, and that's where it picks up. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to my sheaf. Then his brothers said to him, are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words, which obviously they hated him before that as well. Okay? But let me tell you something. One of the first things you got to notice right off the bat. The seriousness that they uphold dreams with. Okay? They seriously, why would they feel that way, that he's saying that this dream means that he's going to rule over them? They already interpreted it. They didn't like the interpretation. But they obviously have a real genuine honor for dreams. Right? You see that right off the bat. Now, of course, it's easy in Scripture. Dreams are a major part of Scripture. We're going to get into that, and it comes up here. But a lot of us in our culture have lost that for dreams, and we just see them as not much of anything. Right? They obviously did not think that way. Okay? And later on, Joseph's answer that, dream interpretation belongs to God. Obviously, Joseph believes that dreams come from God. So let's just establish that. And his brothers obviously believe that too. You notice they immediately interpreted what this dream meant that Joseph gave. They actually interpreted it correctly, didn't they? They did. All right, so now Joseph gets another dream. Okay, and this time his father is involved. All right. Verse 9, now he still had another dream and related it to his brothers and said, lo, I have had still another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. And he related it to his father and to his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother and your brothers actually come and bow ourselves down before you to the ground? And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind. Now, first off, you have to deal with this. God gave him the dreams. Did God know what his brothers were going to do to him? Yes. Did God give him the dreams? Yes, he did. That's very important detail. Because the Lord gave him that dream and then gave him another dream. And the dreams really took this or feelings that they had and pushed them to the limit. All right? And of course, we're going to come back to that, the theological ramifications of that later, but I want to point that out to you now. The other thing is that obviously they had a very high honor for dreams. Okay? So, now his brothers are off pasturing their flocks. They have huge flocks, so they travel a lot, I'm sure. And of course it says in Israel, and you notice that he uses Jacob and Israel interchangeably. Okay? So Jacob sends Joseph out as a messenger to see how it's going, because obviously he probably hasn't heard from them in a while, and he's curious how it's going. So he sends Joseph out to them. And like I said before, Joseph is not with them. At his age, as an older teenager, he would be with them working. But he's not. All right, his father has kept him back. And so he sends them out, and as he, long story short, as he finds them, they see him off in a distance, and they immediately start to plot all right, let's find him, let's take him and kill him. Now, it is incredible that they immediately jumped that far, right? Yeah. But remember, two of them already proved that they have a pretty bloody past, haven't they? And they have a little bit of anger issues since they slaughtered a city, right? So it's not that far-fetched then, is it? And you have to remember, the other thing is you kind of think of them as young men because they're Jacob's sons. They're grown men, all right? Who are dealing with a jealous rage about how their father treats this kid, okay? And the fact that he's not working with them and all these things. So they say, let's kill him. Now, Reuben is the one who actually talks them out of it and gets them to throw him in the pit, but his plan was to go rescue him. All right? So, he always kind of gets lumped in, but Reuben actually is the oldest and tried to keep them from doing what they were doing. But he lost in the end. So he talked them into throwing him in the pit so he could rescue him. Obviously, that also tells you that they were in a hot rage. It wasn't just like this was a calm conversation. All right? That he felt like that's what he had to do to save him. All right? And Joseph, of course, hasn't done anything to them. He's young. He told them the dreams, maybe, not realizing, but he's just interpreting the way he's been taught. He was interpreting them accurately, of course. And he didn't realize what it would produce in his brothers. But so they take him and they throw him down in the cistern. And the cistern had water. So first of all, that means it's deep. And that throwing him down would have hurt. That could have killed him right there. But, he survived. But then a band of Ishmaelite traders. Now, Ishmaelite, wow, it's only been a couple generations. But if you consider from Ishmael to now, it's been, 100 years. It really has. I mean, yeah, I think that's probably accurate. And if you consider how many people can you have in 100 years? Especially when you don't use contraception. And you have multiple wives. Right? A lot. Well, if you consider Abraham, right? And Ishmael was already, at least 15 or more when Isaac was born. It might be over 100 years. Yeah, it could be 150 years. But because it doesn't seem that long ago, he's just the grandson. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham. It doesn't seem like it's that long, but it is. Okay? So the Ishmaelites have become a whole powerful people now. All right? And they're traders. And of course, that goes all the way back. That's history. They were traders and merchants. And so they had this idea. Let's sell him. Let's sell him to them and not kill him, because if we kill him, we will then be guilty of murder. Notice they also have an understanding of blood guiltiness. Remember I explained that to you, and it comes from Noah, right? And Reuben said it multiple times about, there'll have to be an accounting for his blood. So they thought a way around that would be to sell him. They wouldn't kill him. I mean, pretty much in Joseph's mind, they're doing the same thing. Okay, but they thought they would be able to get rid of him and yet not have to kill him and be accountable for his blood. So they sell him, and then they come up with, now Reuben comes later on to try to rescue him, and he's already gone. And he finds out what they've done. And now he has two choices. He can either stand with them and try to help them, deceive Jacob, or they could go tell Jacob. Now, he also could put his life at risk. There's a lot more of them than him. And truthfully, what is he going to do now? It's not like they can go find him. By the time they travel all the way back home, they're going to be miles and miles away. Right? And they probably wouldn't want to give him up without a fight. So, Reuben obviously was in turmoil. The only reason I've thought about that is because I thought about before, well, why didn't he then try to, once they sold him, he could have tried to do something. But really, it's much more difficult than it sounds. So then he made the decision, if I can't beat him, I'll join them. try to spare Jacob from the pain of what they've done. So they find, since they didn't have, mass spectrometers, and they couldn't tell that it was a sheep's blood instead of Joseph's, you wouldn't be able to tell either. Okay, they took an animal, spread the blood all over his coat, his tunic, which they obviously took. And it's interesting that they took that when they sold him, because it was nice, so they snatched it from him. All right? And they had it all torn. They bring it to Jacob and say that, and of course Jacob makes the natural assumption that he was torn by an animal. We don't know what happened to him, but obviously he was. And of course that must happen on a regular basis if you consider. Now you're thinking, what wild animals are there? Well, there's lots of wild animals there. All right? Remember, it is connected to everywhere else. And they have leopards in En-Gedi. They actually do, leopards. Little separate leopards in the middle of the desert in this little oasis. There's little leopards there. All right?
Samson had to deal with lions.
Yep. So obviously that's what happened. That's what they made Jacob think happened, and obviously it wasn't that far-fetched. Okay? So of course Jacob is brokenhearted, destroyed, distraught, all of those things. And time passes. Now, that's where the story ends at this point. And then we go into, one thing I hate doing is starting Joseph and then going to chapter 38 and then having to go back. It's like, now I have to get into this very adult story now. All right? Remember when I told you that the Bible was rated R, right? Okay. That now I have to go, but I'll just go through this one quick and then we'll come back. Now this one obviously is a story that needs a lot of explanation because without background, it seems to make no sense. Okay, and there's also theology here in this story as well. So we will come back to Joseph. I know it's hard to stop one of the best stories in the Bible and then go to this horrible story, but it is important nonetheless. All right? One of the most important theological things to get in this story is, first of all, who killed Onan? Who killed Onan? It's an easy answer. Just look at it. It's just very important for you to get this in your brain. That's why I'm making you look it up. This is in chapter 38. Who killed Onan and his brother? Okay, you're taking too long. God. God killed him. Now you're like, oh yeah, we already knew that. But then again, in the New Testament, God doesn't kill people. God doesn't do anything like that anymore. See how we've made our God that we talk about nowadays, we've made him somebody else? Who killed Onan? Jordan, who killed Onan? You're scared to say it because of the recording. You want to hear your voice be recorded? All right. Class, then, all together. Who killed Onan? Okay, see, I'm making this obnoxious so that you'll never forget it. So when you hear everyone challenging that God wouldn't do that, God couldn't do that, then you will know. Now, this is just one out of a million stories, but I just want you to know who killed Onan. God did. Did God kill Onan because he was being wicked? Is that what it says? Yeah. Yes. Now, could he have died from some illness or something? Yes, but in their mind, it was God that did it. And God did it for a reason. Okay? And that, there's no way around it. I'm going to always point out these little tidbits because, you may not realize how important theologically that is, but it is very important. Okay. So now I know this is a little gross and a little graphic, so I'm going to try to be least gross I can, but there's no way around it. It's gross. Okay? So here's what happens. I hate having to do this, but I have to do it. Because it's wrong and I have to do it. Some people, I remember when I grew up and I went to some youth thing, they tried to use this story as an example of masturbation in the Bible. I know I have saying that you wish I would just skip it, but since people teach that, I have to disagree. That has nothing to do with this story. That cannot be used that way, and masturbation is not mentioned in the Bible. I'm not going to give a big teaching on that at all. You can talk to me that later if you're curious, which I hope you're not. But anyway, that does not have anything to do with this story in any way. Okay? If you haven't heard that taught, trust me, it's taught that way. What this is about abusing his wife. This is sexual abuse, is what this is. Okay? All right, so the first one, okay, now the first guy who the Lord kills, we don't even find out why. We just know he was very wicked. And if Moses wrote that he was very wicked and it was passed down that he was very wicked, I guess he was pretty wicked. Okay? So so the Lord kills him, and then you're wondering about this. Now I have to set this story because this story matters later on, and it has to do with Jewish law and Jewish customs, also laws given in the book of Leviticus. And that's why this story is important as well. So, the law, this is called the law of, actually, it's also from the book of Ruth. And a lot of people like to use the book of Ruth, but they don't realize that that was not something that, like sacrifice, was not something that just started on Sinai. It goes all the way back. So does this custom, okay? Which is, if a man dies without a son, okay, then his wife, okay, the closest male relative, a brother if he has one, or if he doesn't have a brother, his first male cousin, okay, the closest male relative will then take her as his wife. But the firstborn male will not have his name and will not have his inheritance. It will have his dead brother's name and his dead brother's inheritance, and he will be the son. Even though he's his own, legally, in all ways, he will be his brother's son. Now, that has to do with inheritance, and it has to do with land, and it has to do with honor, and all of those things. Okay? That gets passed down, and that is what comes in. If anyone's read the book of Ruth, if you've heard the story and wondered about it, this is the beginnings of that custom, and it's spelled out even greater detail in the Torah. In the law of Moses, okay? Now, we may think that's crazy. We may think, how could they do that? That's cool. See, if you do that and you have that in your mind, first of all, you need to repent. Second of all, first of all, period. Went to the next sentence too quickly. Second of all, you need to realize that you're doing what we said not to do. You're making the fatal mistake. You're taking our culture and you're judging them. All right? In our culture, women can vote. In our culture, women can work. In our culture, women can make money. Right? Isn't that true? Yeah. Guess what? In this culture, a woman without a husband, okay, is usually destitute and lonely or taken in by somebody and living alone. All right? I know we're like, oh, about that. No, it's true. Okay? This is actually God's protection for women. That's what this is. And it's also a way to honor the one who's dead and to keep inheritance in the same family. Okay? So, this is protection for women. It's also another thing about it too, is it's one of the reasons why the Lord never said that polygamy was sin. It's one of the reasons. Now, were all of them because we kind of would think, well, it's only if he was unmarried and he would take her. But that's not necessarily true. Sometimes they would be married, and if he was the only male relative, he would still take her in, okay, and care for her. All right? And yet the firstborn would be the son of his brother. and so forth. Now, it was protection for women, not abuse of women. What they're doing to her is abusing her. And that's why God hates it. All right? And what are they doing to her? Well, in her mind, in God's mind, he's raping her. That's what he's doing. Okay? Why is he doing that? Because the whole point of the blessing and the promise of marriage, okay, is for her to have children. So he is abusing her and taunting her to her face. Now, in our culture, we're so screwed up that we're so used to this that we all think children are evil, and we see, that's why this is a perfect illustration of why we cannot use our culture to try to judge the Bible. All right? Because we're so far removed from this that, what Onan's doing doesn't upset us at all. Does it? No. It very much upset God. Okay? Why? Because he was abusing her. He was stealing from her. What does she want to have? Children. Okay? Why? God, marriage. Children. Okay? He is taking that right away from her. Now, could I really get theological with this and deal with modern marriage? Of course I could. But then again, Christians don't base their choices off the Bible anymore, so, that's why we never hear about these kind of things. But truthfully, this story could be used, not about masturbation, but about children and marriage, because that's absolutely what it's about. All right? So, anyway, I'll move on. This is a sticky subject, okay? But the truth is there's so much to it that you can't skip it. It would be easy for me just to skip over the story, because then I wouldn't have to say those kind of words and talk about these kind of things. And that's what most pastors and teachers do. But the truth is, this story, if you read this for the first time, you must have had questions. You're probably going, what is happening? Where did this come from? I thought we were reading Joseph. Okay? But there's a lot to it. And of course you see that God kills him for spilling his seed on the ground. All right? And so that's what he's doing now. That's only the first part of the story. It gets even weirder. All right? So Judah Judah's wife dies. Okay? Judah's wife dies. Judah does not have multiple wives. He actually has one. Now, if you think of him as young, he's not young. Judah's probably 50. Okay? Easy. And his wife dies. His first two sons, who both took this woman, are dead. But it is still their custom that the next man of age would still take her, and the firstborn son would be the inheritance of the first brother, right? That's still in the books. So Tamar expects that when the youngest one, I'm forgetting his name now. Sheila? Yeah. It's Sheila, right? And when he's old enough, which probably means, he's only 11, 10, 11 years old. When he's old enough, then he take her, okay, and you can figure out the rest. All right? So the point is, he got of age, and Judah never called her, so she's got the point now. He's not doing it. And Judah thinks, and it tells us what Judah's thinking is, first two guys are dead, and what if my third son dies? Maybe he thinks there's some kind of curse on her or something. All right? So she now what you don't understand because of the culture, she is now like broken goods. And it's much more difficult to her to marry and have a life. Okay? Because she's tied to this family. That's their culture. That's their custom. All right? And that's why she's still wearing widow's clothes. It's interesting to know that they wear specific clothes so you know what they are. All right? But she must have known something about Judah. She must have known him a little bit to pull this scheme in for it to work. Right? That's one thing that comes up here. She must have known him because she knows his wife is dead. All right? And why would she think that he would do this unless there was some kind of past something? Anyway, I'll just throw that out there. I can't prove it, but it makes sense. Doesn't make sense that she came up with this out of nowhere, that he would never do anything like this, and then she would pull this plot. She knew something, right? So anyway, that's a separate issue. So now, remember when I told you there was also going to be lots of gross things that you were going to have to deal with? Part of the culture? And you think that our culture is that we don't realize that men are the same as they've always been. There's nothing new under the sun. Okay? So, the point here is that, but then you hear shrine prostitute. Later on, there's male shrine prostitutes. Right now, we still have female ones, thank God. Okay? But the point is that you have, it's like a normal thing. It's not even something that's crazy. You're reading this text and you're thinking, shrine prostitute? But here in the text, it's like, oh, it's just a normal thing. See? Trust me, it only gets way worse. Okay. And it only gets more gross. But anyway, the other thing to remember is that witchcraft is never clean. Witchcraft is always wicked. Always, always, always. Sexual practices and violence. And there's no way around it in every one of them. Okay, they have their version. So, Judah's on a journey, his wife is dead, and Tamar pulls this scheme. Now, of course, she wears a veil. It also shows us that prostitutes cover their face. Okay, I think we could all figure out that. But he then offers to try to pay her, and she says, oh, and what will you give me? She says, okay, I'll give you a sheep. And we're thinking, he's going to pay her with a sheep. Anyway, forget it. That's probably pretty good payment in that day. All right? So she says, but, how will I know it? Because she also knows if she does get pregnant, what Judah will do to her if she doesn't have proof. Right? And of course, he lived up to it, didn't he? All right? So she gets proof. He gets her seal and his cord, which is a ways obviously that's also the kind of thing that rich men have. Okay? And so then he goes and, I won't have to we can skip that part. Go to the next part. Then he wants to pay her, but she's gone. So he sends the sheep, but she's gone. And then he goes looking for her. Have you seen the lady was there? And said, no, she's gone. We didn't see anybody here. There wasn't anyone around. We don't know what you're talking about. So then he kind of just forgets about it. Then he hears, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is pregnant. And of course, all self-righteous that he is, says, take her out and burn her to death for what she's done. Because she broke their law, majorly, in his mind. So did he, by the way, but he isn't holding himself accountable. Now, this is again one of those stories where you have to apply the morality of the law to the story. It doesn't give you an exact opinion. It doesn't say Judah had a problem with this and this was wrong, does it? So without that, you're kind of thinking, well, God must be fine with it. No, you have to take the morality of the law and judge the story. Okay? The law is what judged all action. And that's why it is the foundation. All action is judged by the law of Moses. Do you know that? Everything. It's all judged. There's already a judgment of God. And it's not Moses' judgment, it's God's judgment. So that's the moral system that we use for every other action in the Bible, whether it was a good action or a bad one. So because there is no specific mention of what Judah doing being bad, don't take it that God is okay with it. Does everybody understand that? Okay. So, what he did was, but he also admits it too in the story to some degree. He says, she is more righteous than me. Okay? And he actually takes her in. Now, he's not intimate with her again, but what the point is that he takes care of for the rest of her life. Okay? And she has a son who is, now, if you want to get into all of that, yes, she had the son of her dead husband's father, but anyway. But still, the son will technically be, carry the name of the firstborn son and his inheritance. Okay? Now, did that cover your questions, hopefully, that came up? I'm sure you had them. How could you not have them at this story? Anyway, why it's so important is also because of the children. I mean, the son born. And because it's a very theological story. That's why it couldn't be skipped. Because it has it's important for us. The morality of this story and God's heart of this story is important for us. It really is. You may say, well, it could have been less gross. Well, yes, it could have been, but the Bible doesn't pull any punches. It's all laid out there. This is human behavior at its best sometimes and a lot of times at its worst. Okay? So anyway, that is this story. I did my best. I don't want to spend any more time with it. If you have any more questions on this, please talk to me afterwards about it, and I will do my best, provided you don't get too gross. I'm kidding a little.
She had two sons, though, right? It says she had
Yes, she had two. She's pregnant with twins, and one of them, and that's another reason why this story is important, because one of them comes out, his arm sticks out. It's kind of like Jacob and Esau, how they were fighting to get out, but then she ties a little thing on his arm and pulls it down, and then the other one gets out first. And of course, that all had to do with future inheritance in Israel, because so that's why this was very important. Okay, even though these are Judah's natural sons, they're actually inheritance-wise his grandsons. It's too much. It'll hurt your brain. Just let it go. Okay. Anyway, but that's why this is a very important story. But the morality of it's important too. Okay? And as much as we may think, the main point that you need to get, as much as you may think you don't understand this culture, this is actually different than any other culture on earth. This was God protecting women, whereas every other culture abuses them. And God stood up for this woman who was being abused. You get that? That's a very important thing. Okay. Now we are done. Everyone say, thank God. Let's go back to Joseph. All right? And Joseph has some problems of his own, doesn't he? So, now the story picks up where Joseph is in Egypt. And he is a young Hebrew. It doesn't tell us when he learned Egyptian, does it? But it also tells you that Jacob had him trained well, didn't he? And I think that's what Jacob is an extremely wealthy man who understood something about Joseph. He was also a prophetic man who was filled with the power of God. Very much, the Lord could have trained Joseph and separated Joseph out and had him learn and study and be well educated. That's why when they brought that out in a DreamWorks cartoon of all things, I thought that was a really good write into the story. Now, remember when I told you I'll always separate between the facts of Scripture and opinion? That's an opinion, but I think it has merit. Okay? Because he speaks Egyptian. He's well educated, or you wouldn't be able to be a manager of a rich man's house as well as he is. You would have to have some education, wouldn't you? All right. And he's young, so it's not like he's 30. He's 18, 17. All right? So, anyway, he is taken by a rich man named Potiphar, okay? And he sees Joseph and takes him in, and immediately he's blessed by him. He's impressed with him. And within a short while, he makes him the head of his house. Now, we don't understand really how the rich live, but the point is, why would he need a head house? Well, he's probably got 50 to 100 servants. And an incredible mansion with probably more than one. okay? And he doesn't run it all, he's busy. So he needs someone to run it all for him. And it's the same as a rich man who owns a company, right? Doesn't he find someone he trusts and likes to run his company? Well, it's exactly the same thing that's going on here. So you may think, well, he's just a servant, but actually it's a pretty awesome job. All right? So he's doing well. And God, and he thinks maybe God is blessing me here, you know? I mean, this was going to be horrible, but... And then, Joseph is a perfect example of whenever you think it could get worse, it couldn't get worse, it does. It can always get worse, right? So, Joseph is there, things are starting to go well for him, God is blessing him there, he's now has a good thing going. Now, I also think about this story a lot when it comes to why did this happen? Why did this specific thing happen to Joseph? Joseph, now this is an opinion, I believe Joseph is being tested here. He passed with flying colors, and he got rewarded with jail and imprisonment. Okay, that was his reward for his great actions. All right? But he was tested. He was also tested that he could lose. He's got nothing, and now he could lose the one thing he has. And he had to throw it all away. So anyway, obviously Joseph is a handsome young man, very impressive. And Potiphar's wife falls for him and tries to have an affair with him. And keeps, now it was not a one-time thing. He's been rejecting her for a while. To the point where he can't even be around her. He avoids her completely. So then one time he's alone and she corners him. And she says, sleep with me. And he says, no. He says, how could I do that? I could never. And he also says very specifically, how could I sin against God? He has an incredible fear of the Lord. Even through what he's been through, many of us would now be mad at God, wouldn't we? We'd be angry at God. We would not still be holding to being scared to sin against God after what happened to us. We'd be saying, God, you let this happen to me. You abused me. That's what we do. Not Joseph. All right? Not Joseph. He holds on. Okay? So then she grabs him. And he runs away from her. And even tears his clothes. And now, I always tell all young men, I use this story every time I used to do youth group, and every man I've ever talked to when it comes to this situation. If you're ever in a situation of temptation with women, don't talk, run. It's the perfect illustration because if you talk, you will lose. Run. It's the only answer and it's the only option. All right, so Joseph doesn't sit and have a conversation. He runs. Okay, she's got his clothes tears, now she's scorned. Right? So now she is going to destroy him. And of course, that's exactly what she does. She puts on the waterworks. Potiphar comes home. He tried to, rape me and blah, blah, blah. And he has his clothes. Now, what's interesting to me, and I think that this is another thing that they bring out. It's a little interesting. He's mad and he's angry, but he doesn't put Joseph to death. You would think that would be the repercussion of this.
He already has a pretty good idea about his wife.
Yeah. I think, and they bring this out in the movie again. They just lay a little bit of a seed there that, first of all, if she's like this cannot be the first time. Sure. He can't be that shocked. And the fact is, if he really thought this all the way, this man would not live. All right? So anyway, again, that's conjecture, but I think it has merit. But anyway, now he's thrown in prison. All right, and again, the prison warden wouldn't put him in a high position after a little while if he had tried to rape Potiphar's wife. They would have made him the worst possible prisoner in the world. They would make him suffer more than anything if he was still alive. Okay, so... the jailer is then impressed with them. So obviously, he was extremely intelligent and blessed. God gave him supernatural wisdom and understanding. Didn't he? Yeah. Yes, he did. And the jailer is impressed with him and puts him in charge to run the jail. Okay, but he's still a prisoner and can't escape. But yet he's, at least he has something going on. So some time passes, and it's not just like, a couple of months here. It's years. Time has passed. Okay? Most of us would have all given up on God by now. God doesn't love me. God doesn't care. Right? Joseph holds on. Joseph holds on. He's in prison after being sold by his brothers. Then he chooses to honor God with his choices, and that even ends up in prison. How could it get any worse? So, then we have two characters that end up in jail. All right? We have the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. All right? Both of them were set in there by Pharaoh. Some kind of plot must have come about thinking that, and why, if you're wondering, the chief baker and chief cupbearer, why would that be such a big deal? Those are two huge positions. They're huge positions because before, actually even up until, before the industrial age, kings always had cupbearers. Because why? Because the easiest way to kill a king is to poison him. So the people that were in charge of the king's food and the king's drink were his most trusted people. Okay? Obviously, the baker didn't pan out. Okay? But they're in there while this is being investigated. So they're, obviously, and they're at least for one night because they both have dreams. Now, who gave them the dreams? God did. Did God give the baker a dream that he's going to get killed tomorrow? Yeah, because that's exactly what happened. They're in there, and Joseph, hears them talking, and they're just start to talk about these dreams they had last night. So the cupbearer says, "Yeah, I had this dream," and actually, I want to read the dreams because the specifics in them are really important when it comes to dream interpretation. Okay, I had to take a sip first. So we're in chapter 40. All right? And let's go to
8,
verse 8. Yeah, I think so.
9, yeah.
We'll just start with verse 8. Then they said to him, "We have had a dream, and there was no one to interpret it." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God?" Now, that's one to circle and underline and highlight. Okay? Because what does Joseph believe? Interpretations belong to God. Joseph also believes that dreams have something to them. Right? Joseph obviously clearly has a real reverence for dreams. And he has, now, that's important because it establishes something. We're establishing things. We're establishing that dreams are important and we should pay attention to them, and that God gives people dreams. Now, you know that obviously from the New Testament, don't you? But the point is, it starts here. Actually, the number one way in the Bible God speaks to people is through dreams. You know that? Many, many, many times. Okay, so Joseph hears this. And Joseph, immediately says, "Oh, well, interpretations belong to God. So tell me the dream." You see that also Joseph is very confident that God will give him a clear interpretation. He doesn't question that or even wonder about that. He knows he will. Because he seeks the Lord on it, and the Lord will answer. Right? So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, "In my dream, behold, there was a vine in front of me. And on the vine there were 3 branches, and it was budding. Its blossoms came out, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Now Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, so I took the grapes and squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Then Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now, I like to do a prophetic class where I like to teach about interpretation and stuff, and it's fun because I get a lot from these, from these verses, from Daniel, from different other prophets, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Zechariah as well. There's a lot about interpretation. A lot of the prophets received these incredible revelations through dream interpretation. Dream interpretation is not necessarily just while you're sleeping dreams, because visions very much are interpreted. You like that? Prophesizing and interpreted. Interpreted, visions are interpreted much the same way. And if you get some of those keys, it will absolutely help you. Okay? A lot of people see, a day vision. A day vision is a daydream. You know that? Yes. Okay. Now, can your mind wander onto things that you want and desire? Yes. Can you dream and do that? You ever notice that if you really focus on something incredibly and hardcore, you will inevitably have a dream about it, won't you? If you get some deep emotion into your spirit, will it come out in your dreams?
Yes.
It will. Yes. I also like to clearly throw in here that is also an incredible proof that we are not just, worthless animals without a spirit. That we are, because there is no absolute scientific understanding of how dreams work. And how everybody knows, even if they want to deny it, every person with a decent understanding has experienced a dream that affected them in an incredible way and had something to it in their life. Yes?
My dog has dreams. See her running, chasing, barking.
So every one of us has had a time where we were absolutely shaken to the core. Something dramatic happened in a dream. Also, we've all had an experience where we had a dream and something happened in real life that reflected it.
Yeah.
Has
Yeah.
someone tell me if that's never happened once in their life? Is there anybody here? How could that possibly be random chance? Remember, because if everything's random chance, it's random chance, right? There cannot be something unrandom if it's random. Okay, anyway, that's me going back to Genesis 1. But I can't help it! Because the dream world itself, that's why it's for us to tell these people here, even the Egyptians, that we are just nothing, that there is nothing. Okay? They would slap you. You have a spiritual side to you. How can you know when someone's watching you? Has anyone ever had that experience where you just can feel when someone's watching you? You can't see them, you can't smell them, you can't hear them, but you know. Don't you? Does that have a random understanding? Those scientists try to say, well, there's some kind of kinetic energy that comes, and they're going to go into like X-Men or something, because that's what No. You are a spiritual being. How can you also, if you believe something hard enough, can it affect your body?
Of course.
Yes. Can stress make you sick?
Yes.
How can it be random then? Anyway, I'm going back to the beginning of Genesis. I couldn't help myself. But it is important to get that here. You're a spirit. All right? And dreams and visions are very much a part of it. Okay, I believe that most Christians see and experience more, but they have to be trained on how to use it, and how to hear, how to listen.
Yes.
All right? And that's where a lot of them have never been trained.
When does that class start?
I've done that class multiple times. I just haven't been doing one right now. Anyway, so I believe, though, that Joseph's immediate understanding here of dream interpretation goes right at it. Okay? And he sees the numbers each representing something. Also, what's interesting is that he has all these details in the dream, and it's a very quick and easy interpretation. Not, Yes, well, there was a flower on the wall, and the flower of the wall probably has to do with when you were 7, and, you were bitten by, a sea monster, and then you... I've had people try to interpret dreams, and they have like 5 pages of interpretation when there's usually one sentence. Just this message. God is going to bless you. You have a problem with fear. You mean I have like a 2-hour dream and all these details? None of that matters. It's one simple little message. Tomorrow, 3 days from now, you're going to be restored. 3 days from now, dead. Bam. That's the interpretation. There's a lot more detail in there, isn't there? All right? So, but I love how he goes right at that. So 3 days, and you will be restored to your position. So then the baker's like, oh, that's pretty good. I like that. So then he gives a shot. He goes, so this was my dream. But his dream has a little bit different. It's similar, but it's a little different. I'm getting, birds back then. So then Joseph can imagine Joseph's face. Well, yours has got a little different meaning to it. In 3 days, you will be hanged. And, birds will, I'm sure he was like, thanks a lot for that, man. Good job. But sure enough, what he said happened. Now, Joseph says, remember me when you speak to Pharaoh. Joseph is 100% confident that these things are going to happen. He doesn't seem like maybe it'll happen and maybe it'll go. He knows it's going to happen. He says, remember me when you speak to Pharaoh. Well, of course, it happens exactly the way he said, and of course, the cupbearer totally forgets about it. So then the Lord intervenes for Joseph. Now,
it was a couple more years.
Yes, it was more time to spend. And Joseph probably forgotten about the whole thing, given up on it. All right? Joseph is not a young man anymore. You can estimate he's at least in his 30s, maybe even late 30s. Okay? And so now he... let me get back to the story in my brain here. Okay, so now what happens is the Pharaoh has this incredible dream. Now, I also want to get into dreams, and people always ask me this question. Here's another thing when it comes to dreams and visions. You are an emotional being. You are a spiritual being. If your emotions and spirit is not affected at all, it probably isn't that important. People wonder, how do I know what a dream's important and when a dream isn't? When you wake up and you remember something and it had an effect on you, it's important. Have we all had dreams that you can't even remember? It didn't matter at all? Yes. Aren't you very keenly aware of when something's important? You may not understand it, but your spirit knows when it was important and when it wasn't. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Because the next day you can't shake it.
That's right.
Right? The next day, have you ever had a dream where you thought it was real? And then the next day you're wondering? I've had a dream a couple of times. Not very many, but there's a couple of times where I remember being there a day thinking, did that actually happen?
Yes. Yes.
Did that happen? And you have to take a minute to think about, okay, no, that was a dream. Good thing I remember that. But you were affected. And we've all had lots of things where you're just going in and it doesn't affect you at all. Your spirit knows when it's important. All right? So that's just another little tidbit that I've learned when it comes to interpretation. Anyway, so they totally forget about him, but the Pharaoh wakes up. Now you're thinking, doesn't the Pharaoh have dreams all the time? How could he get so serious about this one? That's why I said that. Because his spirit is jumping. Something was majorly important in this dream. He knew that there was something more. It's not like he never dreams. His spirit knew that there was something to this. God was rattling him. Okay? Why would he think ugly cows and fat cows and, but he was rattled by it. Now, here's another thing that's important about dream interpretation is, you notice every single dream so far in the book of Joseph has been keenly given to that specific person in something in terms that they understand. Notice that? And that is this, I always like to say it like this. Look at your fingerprint. It looks insignificant. But there's no other one like that. All right? Your DNA code, there's no one else like you. So God is fully capable of speaking to you exactly the way you will understand it. And that's why many times when you're giving an interpretation of a dream or a vision, how that person thinks or feels about that specific thing matters, because you may interpret it completely differently. All right? And that's where it comes in, because there's one thing. Something, we might both see skinny cows and fat cows. I may think completely different than you. I may be thinking good ice cream, bad ice cream. You could be thinking about, famine. So it depends on the person. Okay? But what I'm saying is God speaks to you exactly the way that each one of us, I believe we have a unique language. And you have to learn. Like I've learned that God gives me clear pictures and things and I know immediately what they mean. If you saw those pictures, you wouldn't get it. All right? And that is an important thing. Because God speaks to us in a way that we can understand it. And that's also why the Pharaoh knows that this is important. Okay? So Joseph, so the Pharaoh is he's affected, he wants to find out a dream. He gets all of his wise men, all of his, his sorcerers and all of them. He says, come on, interpret this dream for me. None of them can. None of them can. Now, sometimes it's easy to confuse this with Daniel, because you kind of think that the Pharaoh here asked that you tell me the dream and then interpret it. No, that happened in Daniel. Daniel actually had to tell him the dream and then interpret the dream. Okay? Here, none of them can really give the king now, I'm sure they tried to give him interpretations, but none of them, he didn't feel like any of them were right. He didn't trust any of them. So he's unsettled. So then the cupbearer remembers. Oh yeah, there was this guy. I remember when you put me in jail, and remember the thing we don't speak about, right? Well, anyway, there was this young Hebrew that was there, and I remember me and the baker were there, and we were stressed about these dreams we had. He told us exactly what was going to happen, and it happened just like he said. Oh, why don't we see if he's still there? So anyway, they get Joseph. You notice he shaves. They shave him, because obviously, that tradition, Egyptians were always shaved. Okay? So he brings him in before the Pharaoh, and he tells him the dream, and of course Joseph right away. But I love Joseph's answer, of course. We've been told that you have the spirit of the gods and can interpret dreams. And Joseph says, dreams interpretation belongs to God alone. Notice the Pharaoh says gods, and Joseph says God. Right? And very specifically, and says that, and it's also theological, I believe, too, in the sense that Joseph is declaring that if you seek God for an interpretation, he'll give you one. God doesn't give these dreams without wanting to interpret, but interpretations belong to him. And when you try to do it on your own, okay, they belong to God. That's the key part of it. Okay, a lot of people like to use their own intellect to interpret dreams. Okay, but dream interpretation belongs to God. So he says the dream, and immediately Joseph knows what to do. Joseph says, okay, you got the skinny cows. That's, you got the fat cows. The fat cows represent 7 years of plenty, incredible harvest and plenty. Then you have the 7 skinny cows, and the 7 skinny cows represent 7 years of horrible famine, right? And so then Joseph says to him, and then of course Joseph doesn't just tell him the dream, he tells him how to fix it. God is giving you this dream because I always think about that line too, where he says, because the Lord has firmly established that this is going to happen. Firmly made up his mind, it says. This is going to happen, and has given you a warning. So, let the Pharaoh, then he tells them what to do. So, you have 7 years of plenty, you're being warned so that you can take an incredible, store up as much as you can, store up as much grain as you can, because then in 7 years, it'll be, you'll have grain through that 7 years. That's why the Lord is giving you this dream. And then Joseph stops, and then, of course, the Pharaoh looks at him and says, a wise man. I mean, who do we have in Egypt more wise than you? You're the one that just told us what it means and exactly what to do about it. And he also says the spirit of the holy gods is in you. Remember, Joseph always says God, and he always says gods. It's multiple times. It's interesting. But they see and recognize the Spirit of God on him, clear as day. So Pharaoh, being smart, says, why would I go with someone else? You're the guy I want in charge. All right? So he then says, okay, well, I'm going to hand you the keys to the car. You're going to have the whole kingdom. You're going to get this thing done. When it comes just to the throne, I'll be greater than you, but I want you to run this whole thing. All right? And of course, and then he changes his name to Hophnath-Paneah. Everyone, remember that one, right? Hophnath-Paneah. I remember when Connor used to come out when he was 4 years old and he watched the Joseph movie and goes, and the Pharaoh changed Joseph's name to Hophnath-Paneah. That's how I always remember it. Okay? So, anyway, what happens then, and of course he also gives him a wife who is a daughter of a witchcraft priest. Okay? Doesn't really affect Joseph very much, though. You're not going to affect him, and I'm sure he had a major effect on her. Okay? Anyway, so then he pulls this off. They have 7 years of incredible plenty. He stores up more grain, and he stopped counting because it was more than could be counted. And then the famine hits. When the famine hits, it hits Canaan. Okay? It hits Canaan. Now, again, think about this. Well, the key phrase, well, I'll wait till that point. I'll wait till I get to see Joseph in the part where Joseph says that phrase, and then we'll get into it. Anyway, I'll just continue with the story. So the phrase, the famine hits Canaan, and Jacob, they're starting to starve, and then he yells at his sons, "Why are you just standing there? You just gonna let us die? Well, here, there's grain in Egypt. Go get some." So they go down to Egypt. Okay, 10 of them, because Joseph obviously isn't with them, and Benjamin, Jacob won't let out of his sight. Right? They go down there, and immediately Joseph recognizes them. Now Joseph, all right, is Egyptian. Egyptians don't look anything like they're clean shaven. They're all done up. I mean, you never recognize them. The other thing too is that you notice that you don't get it in the story until later on. Joseph uses an interpreter. A lot of times in Scripture, people are using interpreters. They just don't mention it. But you see that here. Later on, you find out he is. Okay, of course, they never portrayed that in the movies. But, anyway. So Joseph is acting like an Egyptian, like he doesn't understand. He doesn't want them to know that he understands them. All right? He immediately recognizes them. And they come through, and he gives them trouble. He messes with them right away. He says, "What are you doing?" And he's inquiring about Benjamin. One of the things I think, too, is why... you wonder, why this thing about Benjamin, about bringing Benjamin to me? I had the thought, well, maybe Joseph is scared that they might have hurt Benjamin. Think about that. What they did to him. He's also daughter of Rachel, who Jacob was treating differently. Joseph very well might have been afraid of what they did to him. And to make sure that he's alive. Right? I mean, it's very possible. Because you wonder, why does he want to know about and bring him to me? He's testing them. And he wants to know, really, he also might have some real fear. Okay? So anyway, he messes with them, and he says, "Who are you?" And he questions them specifically, and then little do they know, he would say, "Okay, you're spies." And why would he do that? Because he wants them to bring Benjamin to him. All right? And also to test them. And maybe a little bit of, maybe a little bit of, a little touch. Okay? So he tells them, "You're spies, and in order, but there is a way." And he goes, "Because I fear God." Notice he said that to them? "There is a way that you can prove it to me, that you're not spies. Bring this younger brother back, and then your story will be confirmed." Okay, and they're like, "Oh my," and of course they're freaking out because they know that Jacob will never let that happen. And they're not sure what to do. They pay the silver for the grain. Then Joseph takes Simeon as ransom. to make sure they come back. All right? And of course, in the movie, they have like him trying to sneak Simeon food, but won't let him know it's him. Right? And his wife is like trying to help. Even then, it's interesting. Anyway, so they go back, okay, and then of course when they're on their way back, they're already stressed out completely, and they find their silvers back in their bags. And now they're thinking, oh my goodness, we're being set up. And then of course immediately, what did they start to do? They started to do it right away with Joseph in front of him when he started to question them. And then Reuben speaks up and says, I told you we would have to give an accounting for the young man's blood. Right? That this is coming on us because of what we've done. Technically, they're right. They just don't know it completely. All right? But they all really now realize that that's exactly what's happening to them. They all recognize it, and they're totally different than they were before. And now with the silver back, they're thinking, oh, God is paying us back. God is giving us what we deserve for what we've done. Anyway, they get all the way back to Canaan. They have some food for a while, and they tell Jacob what's happened. And of course they say Simeon is there, and he won't give us any more, and we can't get Simeon unless we bring back Benjamin to him. And then Jacob goes, why would you tell them about it? He said, well, they questioned us. He asked us very specific questions. How would we know what they would say? You have to remember, then Jacob says no way and lets it go for a while. He lets Simeon stay in prison for a while. He does. All right. Eventually, they start running out of food completely, and they go and talk to him again. And Judah's saying, take my children instead. If I don't make sure. Okay. Anyway, Jacob finally has no choice, and he has to let them go, or they're all going to die. So they bring Benjamin down, and immediately when they get there, they get taken and separated and brought to this other place, and they think, oh no, they know about the silver. This is it. It's over. We're done. And but the guy stops him and says, no, we know about your silver. Your God has blessed you and given you your silver back, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay. So then they get brought to, all of a sudden now they're at his house. And of course, Joseph is still playing the Egyptian side, so he can't eat with them, so he's in a separate thing. And a couple times he has to go out and leave just to, try to wipe his eyes. Imagine the emotions that he's feeling. Just unbelievable. So he's emotional, but he tries to keep it under control. But Benjamin, of course, gets a double portion of food and everything, right? And Benjamin is the innocent one. But now he does know that they didn't hurt Benjamin and that they've accepted him and loved him. See, that matters to Joseph. We forget that little detail of the story, but that matters to him. All right? So then he messes with them a little more, and he sends them back with grain, but he puts this little, thing into. Now, if you're wondering, it says an idol. It means it's a little statue of some sort, and of course they're in Egypt. Okay, they're everywhere. There's, if you're wondering, that doesn't mean Joseph is like worshiping idols. Okay, it does not mean that. So anyway. I heard people could try to interpret it that way. That's not what it means. So he could, but he slips it into Benjamin's sack, okay, and knowing exactly what he's going to do. So they go, and of course, then he sends his servant after them, and they say, "Oh, but it's fine. But someone stole this." And they're like, "No, we didn't do it. We didn't steal anything. No way." And then they would say, "If you find it, you can kill the one who did it." All right, little do they know. Then they go through all the sacks, and they go through Benjamin's, and there it is. And they all then freak out. No, God this is God's vengeance for what we've done. And they all are totally, blown away. And they come back and they cry out. They fall on their knees and they beg for mercy, pleading their case. And Joseph tries for a little while. Don't you know that I can figure this out? And then eventually, he can't handle it anymore, and he sends everyone out. And then and imagine the moment when he all of a sudden starts to speak Hebrew. He's speaking with an interpreter the whole time. They have no idea. All of a sudden, he exclaims in Hebrew, "I'm Joseph. is my father still alive? And then it says in the text, it tries to capture the moment. They didn't answer. Just imagine what came over them.
They were experiencing the fear of God.
Yes. Then he keeps talking, and they're probably just, and then they realize it is really him. Now they're afraid that, what is he going to do? But he tells them, come here, and he reassures them that he's not going to hurt them. But then he says the most important part of the entire story. The most important line of the whole entire story is, I have it, I want to actually read the exact quote. Okay? Which is, where is it? Anyway, I thought I had that one written down specifically, but for some reason all of a sudden I'm not finding it. Okay, yes, because I'm not going far enough. All right, here's where it is. Okay? It's in chapter 45. Okay? Verse 5. And now do not be grieved or angry with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. Now that is very important, because that means that God knew what they would do and allowed it. Does that mean God allowed 30 years of pain and suffering for Joseph?
Yes, it does.
Yes, it does. Would God do that? Yes, he did. Did God save them and use Joseph to deliver them? Yes. Did those dreams probably keep Joseph going while he was rotting in prison?
Yes.
Yes, I'm sure they did. Those dreams all are also now comforting them all later on, that God used even though they made a horrible choice, he turned it for good for those who love him. He used that horrible choice for their benefit, for Jacob and for Joseph. Right? To preserve their lives and to bless them. And so that is, you can't escape it. You cannot escape it. God did it. All right? Now, after Genesis, we're going to go into the book of Job. And it's also one of the major lessons of the book of Job. Okay? And we're going to spend time on it there, so that's why I don't have to spend a ton of time on it here, because I'm going to come back to this specific subject then. And I'm going to mention the story then as I lay the case. Okay? But that is a verse to underline, to highlight, to get in your spirit. Would God allow Joseph to go through this horrible situation? Yes. Did God have a good purpose in mind?
Yes.
Yes. Has any of us ever been through something horrible and painful?
Of course.
Can God use horrible tragedy to bring about a wonderful purpose? Trusting God and real faith is holding on to that in the midst of tragedy and circumstance.
Right. Amen.
When we lose that, which Joseph could have done at any time, he could have gotten off it. He could have gotten angry with God. He could have slept with Potiphar's wife. It would have been easier for him to just do it. Right? It would have been easier for him to then get angry in jail, to quit, to kill himself. Especially then when he got raised to this position to totally reject God. These are all the things we would have done. You have to see that Joseph, God understood that God, all that he went through was for a reason. Now, it was not just one bad year. It was not just 5 bad years. It was not just 10 bad years. It was a long time of suffering. But Joseph trusted the Lord. And God used it all to save Israel and his children. Okay? So, we're going to end here. We got through it. There's still a little bit more left. It goes back and Jacob comes down, and we're going to do that when Jacob meets Pharaoh and then he lays hands on his sons. We'll deal with all of that next week. I want you to start reading the book of Job. Okay, we are following a chronological order through the Bible. That's why we go to Job next. All right, because Job takes place during the time of the patriarchs. All right, so Job has got a lot of chapters, but honestly, the chapters are kind of small and it's written in poetic form. So I want you to read Job, the whole thing. Now, that's a decent amount of reading. Did everyone finish Genesis? Who didn't finish Genesis yet? Anybody? Okay, so all of you finished it already, so then it's no problem at all. If you finish Genesis, then please read Job. Job is not going to be like Genesis. I'm going to go through it in one class. We will be done with it, and then we move on to Exodus.
Really?
Yes, because I am not going through every little part. I am just dealing with the main storyline and the main theological premise. And there is a lot of theology in Job. Okay? So we'll pick that up next week. We'll finish this and we'll dive into Job. Bless you. We'll take a short break.